Have you ever noticed that squirrels don't stop for everyone? They rush past most people without a second glance. But sometimes they pause. They sit quietly on a fence post, or beneath a maple tree, or on the edge of a porch rail, and they watch, not with fear, not with panic, but with a strange stillness, almost as if they recognize something. Many older people notice this after retirement, after the house becomes quieter, after the children move away, after the funeral flowers disappear, and especially after losing someone they loved. That's when the squirrels begin appearing more often. One in the backyard every morning, one waiting near the mailbox, one scratching softly outside the kitchen window at exactly the same hour each day. Coincidence? Maybe. But for many people living alone in quiet suburban neighborhoods, these small encounters begin to feel deeply personal. Because sometimes, when the world stops calling your name, nature still does. And tonight, we're going to talk about the quiet reason squirrels seem to watch certain people more than others. Not everyone notices it, but the people who do usually understand loneliness in a way the world can't see. There's a certain kind of person squirrels seem drawn to. Not loud people, not rushed people, not people constantly looking down at glowing screens while hurrying through life. Squirrels seem to notice people who move more slowly now. People who sit outside longer than they used to. People who water plants in silence. People who stare at the evening sky without realizing how long they've been standing there. These are older people. Widows. Widowers. Retired veterans. Grandparents whose homes became too quiet after the holidays ended. People living in suburban streets where every house looks familiar, but fewer doors open than they once did. And if you've ever lived in a quiet neighborhood in autumn, you know the feeling. The sound of distant lawn mowers. A dog barking 2 streets away. Wind brushing through old trees planted decades ago. A porch swing moving gently with nobody sitting on it. There's a loneliness unique to suburban life. Not dramatic loneliness. Not the kind people notice immediately. It's quieter than that. It's eating breakfast alone at the same kitchen table for years. It's hearing the refrigerator hum because the house has become too silent. It's reaching for your phone, then realizing there's nobody left to call at that hour. And strangely, this is often when people begin noticing the squirrels. Not just as animals, but as companions, tiny witnesses to their routine. A squirrel waiting near the bird feeder every morning at 7:10. Another crossing the same fence each evening before sunset. One sitting under the oak tree while an older man drinks coffee alone on the patio. The squirrel never speaks, but somehow, its presence softens the silence. And maybe that's because squirrels live by attention. They notice energy before movement, stillness before sound, safety before approach. They are constantly scanning the world for emotional weather. And lonely people carry a very quiet kind of weather around them. Not dangerous, not loud, just open. After someone dies, the world changes in strange ways. Not all at once. At first, there's paperwork. Phone calls, casseroles, people checking in. But eventually, the world becomes ordinary again. For everyone except the person grieving. That's the hard part nobody prepares you for. The way normal life keeps moving. Trash trucks still arrive Tuesday morning. Neighbors still mow their lawns. Television commercials still laugh too loudly. Meanwhile, inside the grieving person's home, time feels different. A sweater still hangs behind a bedroom door. A favorite coffee mug remains untouched. One side of the bed stays perfectly smooth. And suddenly, nature becomes easier to notice. Because grief changes your attention. You begin hearing birds you never noticed before. Rain feels heavier. Sunsets linger longer. And squirrels somehow feel closer. Maybe because squirrels understand routine. They return to familiar places repeatedly. They remember safe homes. They revisit spaces where they once felt calm. In a strange way, grieving people do the same thing. They replay memories, revisit old conversations, walk through emotional spaces again and again. Perhaps that's why the connection feels comforting. A squirrel appearing every day in the same place can feel reassuring in a world where everything else changed. Some people even begin talking to them softly. Not because they think the squirrel understands every word, but because speaking aloud makes the house feel alive again. And honestly, sometimes the squirrel stays longer than expected, watching quietly, listening, not running away. For a person carrying loss, that tiny moment can mean more than most people realize. Because grief often creates invisibility. Friends stop asking how you are. People assume you've moved on. But squirrels don't expect performances. They don't ask for explanations. They simply arrive. Again and again. Like small reminders that your presence still matters in this world. There's something deeply emotional about suburban mornings. Especially older American neighborhoods built decades ago. Wide driveways, tall trees, wooden fences faded by time, wind chimes hanging beside screen doors. These places hold memory. And for people aging alone, the neighborhood itself becomes a companion. Many older people no longer rush through mornings. Instead, they observe. Coffee steaming beside a fogged-up window. The mailman walking house to house. A squirrel balancing along electrical wires overhead. These tiny details become sacred, because healing rarely arrives dramatically. Most healing enters quietly, through routines, through familiar sounds, through moments that gently remind us we still belong to the living world. And squirrels are masters of quiet presence. Unlike pets, they aren't owned. They choose where they appear, which somehow makes their attention feel meaningful, especially to someone who feels forgotten. An older woman may sit outside every evening after dinner, wrapped in a cardigan her husband once loved. At first, she notices one squirrel near the hydrangeas. Then another week later, the same squirrel returns. Soon she begins expecting it, looking for it, smiling when it arrives. Not because the squirrel replaced her loneliness, but because it interrupted it. That matters more than people think. Loneliness is rarely cured all at once. Usually, it softens in tiny moments. A neighbor waving. A song from the 1970s playing in a grocery store. Rain against the roof at night. A squirrel pausing long enough to make someone feel noticed. Sometimes healing begins with something very small saying, "I see you still here." Animals read humans differently than humans read each other. People often listen to words. Animals listen to tension, breathing, energy. That's why squirrels usually avoid rushed people. But older people living alone often move differently. Softer, slower, more predictably. Their homes become calm environments. No shouting, no chaos, no sudden movement, just routines. And squirrels love predictable places. But there may be something deeper too. People who've experienced grief often carry gentleness afterward. Pain changes them, not always visibly, but emotionally. After losing someone, many people become quieter observers of life. They notice fragile things more carefully. A dying leaf, a cold morning, A squirrel carrying food before winter. Loss creates tenderness, and animals respond to tenderness. Have you ever noticed how squirrels sometimes freeze and stare directly at someone? Not in fear, but with alert curiosity, almost as if they're evaluating the emotional atmosphere around that person. Many lonely people describe feeling strangely emotional during these moments. Not because they believe the squirrel is magical, but because for one brief second, they don't feel invisible anymore. And invisibility is one of the hardest parts of aging, especially in modern life. Stores become self-checkout. Neighbors stay indoors. Families get busy. The world grows faster while older people often grow quieter. But nature still notices quiet things. The squirrel notices who sits outside every morning, who leaves breadcrumbs near the fence, who waters flowers carefully, who never harms anything. And maybe that's why certain people begin feeling spiritually connected to these small animals. Not because the squirrel carries mystical powers, but because being calmly observed by another living creature heals something ancient inside us. Something human. There's a reason certain videos about nature make people emotional, especially older viewers. It's not really about the animal itself. It's about recognition. The feeling that life is still interacting with you, still reaching toward you. Many people living alone quietly fear becoming disconnected from the world. Not physically, emotionally. They wonder, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone notice? That question lives silently inside many aging hearts. And strangely, nature often answers it first. A squirrel waiting outside the window each morning. Birds returning to the same feeder. A deer appearing at dusk near the backyard. These patterns create emotional continuity, a sense that life still remembers you, that you are still part of the rhythm of the earth. Modern life rarely offers this feeling anymore. Everything is fast, digital, transactional, but nature operates differently. Nature still pauses, still watches, still returns. And for people who once spent decades caring for others, raising children, working jobs, holding families together, these quiet encounters can feel deeply healing. Because after a lifetime of being needed, many older people suddenly face silence. And silence can become dangerous if it turns into emotional isolation. But squirrels interrupt isolation. Not dramatically, just gently enough. A rustling sound near fallen leaves. Tiny paws running across the porch roof. A tail flickering beside flower pots. Life reminding you, you are still surrounded by living things. That realization matters. More than society understands. One reason suburban nostalgia feels so powerful is because memory attaches itself to ordinary locations. Driveways, front porches, backyards, kitchen windows. And squirrels often appear in those exact spaces, which means every encounter accidentally touches memory too. An older man sees a squirrel near the fence where his wife once planted tomatoes. Suddenly he remembers her laughter. An elderly woman watches squirrels gather acorns beneath the same oak tree where her grandchildren once played. For a moment, the years collapse together. Past and present sharing the same backyard. That's why these moments feel emotional. Not because squirrels are supernatural messengers, but because they reconnect people to continuity, to memory, to life still moving gently around them. Sometimes the squirrel becomes part of the daily ritual itself. Porch chair, morning air, squirrel. Routine creates emotional stability, especially after loss shattered old routines. And there's something beautiful about that. Because healing doesn't always mean moving on. Sometimes healing means learning how to carry love differently. To continue living beside absence without letting absence consume everything. Nature helps people do that. Quietly. Without speeches. Without advice. Just through presence. You may wonder why millions of people are drawn to stories like this online. Why older viewers leave comments saying, "This made me cry," or "I thought I was the only one." It's because modern loneliness is incredibly common, but rarely discussed honestly. Especially among older adults. Many people spend entire days without meaningful conversation. Entire weekends alone. Entire evenings sitting beside televisions simply to hear another voice in the house. And when a squirrel begins appearing regularly, it can feel surprisingly personal, predictable, comforting, alive. These tiny relationships matter emotionally because they restore connection without pressure. The squirrel expects nothing. It doesn't judge aging. It doesn't care about wrinkles, grief, or retirement. It simply shares space. And sometimes, shared space is enough to soften loneliness for one more day. That's powerful. In a world obsessed with productivity and noise, small peaceful moments become sacred medicine. A squirrel sitting beneath falling autumn leaves. A quiet backyard at sunset. Wind moving through trees planted 40 years ago. These things remind people that life still contains gentleness. And many older people desperately need gentleness. Not motivation. Not lectures. Not constant stimulation. Just gentleness. So, why do squirrels seem to watch certain people? Maybe it's because those people move more softly through the world. Maybe grief made them gentler. Maybe loneliness made them more aware of life's smaller details. Or maybe squirrels simply recognize peaceful spaces when they find them. But perhaps the deeper reason is this. People who feel unseen often notice being noticed more deeply than everyone else. And when a small wild creature pauses long enough to quietly acknowledge your presence, something inside the human heart responds. Especially after loss. Especially in silence. Especially in homes where memories still live in every room. The squirrel may not know your story. It may not understand your grief. But for one brief moment beside a quiet porch or backyard fence, it reminds you of something important. You are still here. Still part of the living world. Still being noticed by life itself. Sometimes, that feeling is enough to carry someone through another evening alone. So the next time a squirrel pauses and watches you from a tree branch, don't rush the moment. The world is full of noise. But some of the most meaningful connections arrive quietly. Maybe that small creature isn't just looking at you. Maybe it's reminding you that the universe hasn't forgotten you after all.